So this has been pretty difficult to sort out, trying to get relative volume on a tick chart. Let me just explain very briefly what relative volume is. So relative volume analysis is probably one of the most difficult things to get right on an intraday chart because of the seasonality and the seasonality of the volume throughout the day, and then the variance between the different sessions, between the overnight session and the day session. So this is that variance between the sessions here, where on the ES you've got very low overnight volume. Yeah, bear with me, guys. This is not exactly completely ready here, but so relative volume is what I have here on the top panel. All right, this is raw volume in the bottom. This is actually showing you the total number of contracts traded for each hour bar. So this is an hourly chart. Relative volume on top, raw volume on the bottom. You see the problem with intraday volume analysis, trying to compare the overnight volume with the day session volume, especially in something like the ES, basically any equities markets. Crude oil is, still bad enough, but it's becoming more of a global market. Gold is maybe not that bad, but something like the ES is especially bad in the variance between the different sessions. So to try to compare that overnight volume with the day session volume is essentially pointless. And then you have the problem with the lull in the lunch session during the lunchtime. So very high volume at the open, very high volume at the close, typically lower volume during the lunch time. So you have that kind of seasonality effect. Relative volume, the purpose of it is to eliminate those two problems, to eliminate the variance between the sessions and the seasonality effect throughout the day. And we're doing that by comparing the amount of volume that's trading for each individual bar and comparing that relative to the average volume for that bar's time period. Okay, so for instance, for this bar that closes at 2 p.m., we would compare that volume to the average volume of the past, 10, 15, 20 sessions for that 2 p.m. bar, for that bar that closes at 2 p.m. You see? So the question has been, well, how do you do that on a non-time-based chart? How would you do that on a tick chart? You would have to come up with a pretty elaborate algorithm to, wouldn't necessarily have to be that elaborate, but to be able to perform the calculation for each individual bar, and even in real time, which our tools are all real time because they basically have to be. So to be able to do that effectively, efficiently is, with as little strain to the CPU as possible, was basically impossible for Ninja 7. So now that we're on Ninja 8 and we have everything starting to port over, we were able to implement this relative volume calculation on non-time-based charts as well. So when we look at a tick chart, let me just show you a tick chart here. So this is a tick chart of the ES. It's a 2400 tick. So even on the tick chart, even though, let me add the raw volume here so you get a full idea as to what I'm talking about. Even though we're looking at the total number of transactions, so it's, each bar is made up of 2400 transactions. And typically for the ES, you have about let's say about 2.5 contracts per tick, between 2 and 2.5, something like that. So when you're looking at the volume, the total volume relative to a tick chart, you really don't have that much difference between each bar from one bar to the next. It's typically pretty tight like you see it here, right? But you still have very high volume at the close, and typically pretty high volume at the open, but usually more so at the close. So a lot larger volume per tick at the close in the ES than at the open. Okay, and that's pretty steady. So when you're looking at raw volume on a tick chart, it's, you know, it's still fairly useful, I guess, but it's not nearly as useful as it could be if you were able to figure out how to get the relative volume calculation to work on a tick chart. Okay, so like right here, in the relative volume, we have a selling climax followed by a churn bar, right? That's that 2-bar pattern that we always look for in the trading room, that we see quite often, actually, at major turning points. So we have a big selling climax here, and then that sign of strength, which starts this volume divergence signal here. So that's the beginning of the volume divergence, where you get very high volume at the end of a move, at the end of a climax. Then you get a sign of strength back up, and then you come back and test that high volume, but on lower volume. As you see here, it's much lower than it was back here, right? And we're getting that out of the relative volume, but there's no way that you would get that out of the raw volume on a tick chart. So, you know, while raw volume on a tick chart, on a non-time-based chart, is still useful, it's giving you different information. So it's giving you, you know, very high volume on a tick chart is basically telling you, okay, well, you've got a very large number of contracts per tick. You've got a higher number of contracts per tick than usual. So there's probably, you know, a fairly good likelihood that you have some people with a little bit more money starting to step into the market there. That doesn't necessarily mean that the market's going to turn there, right? But, you know, just because you have more money and you can trade more contracts doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be right every time. So you will see high volume per tick at many turning points, but it's not as useful information as the relative volume can give you. So now we can actually get the relative volume on these non-time-based charts. Okay, I don't have a range chart, but I'll show you that here in a minute, Mark. So, for instance, at this high, you do have pretty high volume per tick right there. So you might actually have a little bit of a volume divergence on the normal, just raw volume input for the volume analyst there. But here, it's a huge, huge amount of volume relative to what you would normally have for that time period, you see? So it's actually 1,000%. So it's 10 times, or let's say it's 9 times, what you would normally have for that time period. So what we've done, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, and I'm still playing around with a couple of different methods here on how to do this. But what we've done with this relative volume to be able to get it to display on these non-time-based charts is make it multi-time frames. So now the volume analyst is fully compatible with the use of multi-time frames. So there's a lot of other things that we can add with that. It's also completely rebuilt to be able to take all these new conditions that I'm working with and these different inputs for bid and ask data and all that. But here, where are we at here? Right here. So for the historical series right here, I can, for a non-time-based, well, for any chart, but for a non-time-based chart, I can set it to either use the bar of the base chart, the native chart, the chart that it's on, or I can make it use a minute period. Okay, and then it will actually compare the amount of volume for each. Let's just take one bar, for example. So for this down bar right here, this selling climax, let's say that is about a 1 minute bar. There's about 60 seconds within that bar. So it would actually compare when it's set to 3 minutes like it is here. It would compare a third. Well, let me start with the actual average. So it would take, for the 3-minute bar that this bar is within, makes up, it would take that 3-minute bar for the past several sessions, whatever number of sessions that I use here, in this case 4, and it would average that, and that would be the value that I would compare the amount of volume that transacted for this bar. Okay, but I would compare it to only 1/3 of the average that I found, you see. So that's not the best way to explain it, but when I send this out, I'll have a pretty detailed write-up as to how this is all working and how you can modify it. So you can actually set this to whatever you want, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. The higher the number, typically the smoother it will be. So you won't have, you wouldn't necessarily have, say, about 1,000% relative volume for this one. If you set it to a 10-minute chart, it would be closer to like 600%. Okay. And then here, for this historical sample multiplier, we could even do, like say I set this to 2, it would use 2 consecutive 3-minute periods. I know that's probably a little difficult to understand. That's more for use with the minute charts, but that's not quite working the way that I need it to work right now, so I'm not even going to bother going into detail about that. The gist of it is, it's finally working. I know that when you guys bought this, a lot of you a while ago, I was saying that that was kind of the next major thing that I wanted to do. I wanted to get the relative volume working on non-time-based charts, on tick charts. And it was just basically impossible to do on Ninja 7. So now that we're on Ninja 8, we finally managed to make it happen. And it's producing some pretty incredible stuff, I think. Like, you're getting a heck of a lot more and better signals from the relative volume on these tick charts. This is a RTS chart. So this is the bar that I included with the volume analyst last time we released it for Ninja 8. And this one is not displaying properly here, but let me show you. Just going to remove this one. So this is also a non-time-based chart. It's built from 3 different inputs: range, ticks, and seconds. So basically, the way that I have it set up right now, it's kind of a hybrid between ticks and seconds. So in the overnight, it would function basically more like a tick chart, and then during the day session, it would start to plot more like a time-based chart. All right, so yeah, this is relative volume here on the RTS hybrid bar. So these charts, because they're kind of like a hybrid, well, it's what the name suggests. It's a hybrid between the 2 chart types, between time-based and non-time-based. And the way that we've done it, though, we've made it to where this calculation will work for any type of chart, no matter what it is, no matter how it's built. So each bar is basically processed independently, and then if we're using a minute period to define the relative portion of the calculation, to define the inputs for the relative calculation, then let's say that this bar let's say that you set it to a 5-minute period, and this bar kind of falls in between 2 5-minute bars. Let's say the first third of it fell on one 5-minute bar, and then the second 2/3 fell on the next 5-minute bar. Well, this accounts for all of that, and it does each bar's calculation independently. So it's working perfectly on all these different non-time-based charts or hybrid charts or whatever. Let me show Mark this range chart. I haven't actually used it on a range chart yet. The only problem with range charts will be that I may have to make a different calculation for that, actually. Because the range is the same for each bar, and we're building these signals based on the amount of volume relative to the range of the bar. Like, for instance, a churn bar is very high volume per range. It may need a couple of tweaks here and there. But yeah, it definitely does display. Let me see how I have it set here. $5-minute, yeah. All right, so that's 1700% for that range bar using a 3-minute input. Let's try a 10-minute. Sorry, guys, I'm halfway out of it today. 1900%. Yeah, there's still a couple of quirky little things with this. Josh and I are working on it, though. We've figured some stuff out this morning early. So I'm thinking the multiple time frame stuff is still, it's a couple of weird little things that I need to sort out with it. So it's this is not the exact way that it will be displaying in the future. But it's working with a relative calculation now, but there's like 4 or 5 different ways that we can do it for non-time based charts. Well, there's 3 main ones, major ones, and trying to figure out what are the best, I guess the best one, but we may have like 2 different display options for these non-time based charts. So only one is working right now, and I think the way that I really want it to display, the way that I want it to work, is not quite sorted out yet. So it is a bit of a complex calculation, complex algorithm. But yeah, it's working. All right, so let me just do this briefly. I want to show you the reader system inside of Bloodhound before we go. Before I do that, let me just answer a couple of questions real quick, and then we'll take about a 2 or 3 minute break. And then I'll show you guys the reader in this new Bloodhound beta that I'm testing. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's taken a while, man. Well, it's taken a while to get to the point to where we could even begin actually implementing it. But just to implement it has been pretty difficult, and then to get it to work inside of the market analyzer with multiple time frames it's just a whole other animal, I guess. It's just very, very difficult, higher level stuff. Why does it say minute relative vol? Oh, yes, because I'm using a minute period for the input of the relative calculation. So because it's multiple time frame for non-time based charts, you can either use the time period for the relative calculation of the range bar, the tick bar, the RTS bar, whatever, which I don't really recommend because it could be, one could be 5 seconds, the other could be 10 minutes. So to make that more, in my view, appropriate, you would want to use an input of of some minute period, whether it's, you know, at the smallest, I would say nothing smaller than 3 minute or 2 minute. I think 1 minute is too small, but typically for me, 5 minute is going to be the lowest value that I'll use for the input for the relative calculation. And then from there, it takes that average and compares, you know, however much time makes up that non-time-based chart. Let's say it's 10% of the 5 minute period. So it will compare the amount of volume for that bar to 10% of the average that we found for this input, you see? So because we have it set to minute here, it's going to display minute as the input for the relative volume because of that multiple time frame. And then I could use multiples of that period, which this, of course, is much more useful for. Let's say that you have it on a 2 minute chart and it's not quite working the way that I want it to right now, so I'm not going to bother showing you. But let's say that you put it on a 2 minute chart, relative volume on a 2 minute chart. You know how you have those really huge relative volume bars that are like 1,500%, 2,000%? So those are that huge because of the sample size. You don't have a whole lot of data within a 2 minute period to kind of smooth out and average out some of those higher sigma, some of the higher standard deviation volume bars. So to get around that, or let's say to make a better comparison, in my view, better, you would want to use more or a larger sample size, which would mean a larger time frame. So I have it to where we can set a multiple of 2, 3, 4, 5, you know, whatever, so that it'll take 2 times the size of the 2 minute chart, which would be 4 minutes, and use that as the input for the relative calculation. Okay, or we could set it to 5 and use a 10 minute chart as the input for the relative calculation. You see? So it'll kind of smooth out some of those really huge signals, which aren't necessarily as, you know, they shouldn't be as accentuated as they actually are. Only reason they are is because you have less data. So I've just been trying to figure out ways to make this thing basically as useful and functional as possible. It should be pretty amazing once we're done here. Once I add in all this Bidask stuff and this relative delta that I'm going to start implementing here soon, this thing is going to be pretty amazing. One other thing that I'm going to add, actually, before let me just kind of go over this briefly. What is this? So you know how you don't really have directional signals out of the bar signals like the churn bar, the climax, and all that stuff. We don't really have that in there because it basically what it would do is it would double the amount of signals and colors that we would need. But I'm thinking of just giving you the option for that anyway. You know, let's say that you have a selling climax. Everybody's used to it being this color. Same for the selling climax as it is for the buying climax. But in the next version, which I'm hoping I'll have it all sorted out by the 24th, you'll actually be able to tell whether it's a selling climax or a buying climax. Right now, it's just a climax. So I want to be able to differentiate between, you know, a climax at the end of a down move or a climax at the end of an up move, and then get a +1 for the signal at a low and then a -1 at a high, or, you know, whatever we use inside of that data series. So I'm going to be adding that in, and then I think there was another good example right in here. Yeah, like right here. So that bar is not quite showing up as a climax because of a couple of filters that I have on right now. But one thing it also isn't showing is the fact that it's closed all the way up off of its low and now in the top 5% of the entire bar. Okay, so there's really nothing in here as of right now to tell you programmatically or visually through some sort of alert or text message or whatever that this was a huge down bar, but it's now closed all the way back at the opposite end. So that's one thing that I'm going to try to show visually. I mean, I already know how I'm going to do it programmatically, but to show visually maybe some sort of like opaque background behind the wick, something, So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do that, but I'm going to try to make it to where it's at least got directional signals added to the barcodes, to the buying climax, or sorry, to the climax, the churn, extreme climax, extreme churn, to be able to get selling climax, buying climax, churn bar to low, churn bar to high, and differentiate that within the data series so that we can actually get directional signals from the readers and Bloodhound and all that. Okay. Beyond that, the other main thing that we'll be adding will be those conditions for the bid and ask data. Jordy's asking, does the calculation of extreme volume spikes change at all with a new version? No. There are more filters. Well, it's the same filters that we have in the previous version right now. But you'll have the same control that you have over it right now. Which is where, right here. No, what I am going to do is add some control for that. Actually, we don't have the control for those spike objects. I'm starting to think that once I get the climax and the churn signals worked out the way that I want, with different degrees of how would I do that? That's going to take me more time. I'll leave the spikes in for now. I was going to say that once I get this completely worked out, the differentiation that I'll have between the different degrees of churn and degrees of climax would help to eliminate the need for the spikes altogether. But I'm thinking that'll be in actually the next version. So I'll leave them in there. I'll probably just continue to leave those in there, even if I do remove the need for them, just because you guys have grown accustomed to them. But once I get this thing the way that I want it, we won't need those spike signals anymore. They'll be kind of caked into the climax and the churn signals. Yeah, I know everybody does like those and use those. I'm just thinking that basically once I get this thing nailed down, all of the signals that we have for all the different spikes, those would be taken care of with all the other signals that we have, climax and the churn. But yeah, it is kind of nice to see that little drawing object there, isn't it? Yeah, I don't think I'll ever completely remove them anyway, but once this thing is done, it's going to be pretty elaborate and very well defined as to what it's actually showing. You're really just interested in extreme spikes, okay? Without any relation as to where it's at or how big the bar is, how big the range is relative to the previous ranges or anything like that. What is the VIG? Mark, what's the VIG for NT7, folks? Yeah, Mark, you can just send me a check for 10, 15, yeah, about 15 grand. And I'll just go ahead and send it to you. Make it 20. Rob, yeah, it does. Actually, we do have it working in the market analyzer now. The only thing that's not working so well, probably just not even possible actually, is the multiple time frame stuff. So I don't know that we would be able to get the relative volume on tick charts in the market analyzer. I mean, you could via the reader, but to actually put the relative volume on a tick chart in the market, I don't think it's possible. If I understood Josh correctly. But for all the other ones, yeah, you definitely can. Like if you're putting relative volume just like you would have it normally in NinjaTrader 7 on a minute chart inside of the market analyzer and NT8, then it functions just fine. It's when you try to use that historical multiplier and higher time frame stuff that it's just doesn't do it. Can't use multiple time frames in the market analyzer, evidently. So this is actually going to be for everybody that owns the volume analyst, it would be a free upgrade. If you just own the relative volume and you don't own the volume divergence, let's see. I have that figured out, but I'll if you'll write in, Mark, I'll give you the link to that. This won't actually be available until May 24th though, for download, but there is an existing one for Ninja 8 that you could use. It just doesn't have all of this relative volume for the non-time based yet. Fatima is asking, when do you think that we can add the volume analyst programmatically without having to use shark indicators? Not sure what that would take, actually. I'll ask Josh. Josh, are you in here? Do you have any idea what that would take to be able to expose everything? You may have already done that in Ninja 8. I don't know. No, he's not in. Yeah, I'll ask him about that though, Vadim. It shouldn't be too difficult, I wouldn't think. How do you define more effectively, Jordy? It's pretty effective. It's a massive algorithm to find the volume divergence. If you know how to make it better, I'll definitely add it. There may have been a couple of issues in the Ninja 8 version, but the Ninja 7 version is as far as I can tell, I mean, it's perfect. You just have to you have to fine tune exactly what you want it to display, because you have to put upper and lower limits on certain inputs. It's just the way it kind of has to be to display any type of pattern type signal. You have to have upper and lower limits. So it's just a matter of kind of fine tuning the way you want to show it. But I'll have more details on that for sure, as far as in the documentation and how to kind of do that fine tuning. So I'll definitely have that. All right. Good deal, Pep. Yep. Have a good one. Tim is saying he did a lot of back testing on the extreme spike stuff, and he found it's just not quite enough information. Bruce is asking, can I show you the most reliable way to set up email alerts using Bloodhound? I wish I could, Bruce, but there's really not. You can set it up properly in Ninja, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I have no idea what it depends on. I guess it depends on their server, but I've only had it working once or twice, and it seems like it's different for every person. So that was one of the main reasons why we did our own email alert system. See, this is one weird thing about Ninja. I don't know why it does this, but there is something strange with the whole user interface of the charts. See how it puts like some padding around the charts? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So there is something fishy there. But anyway, yeah, as far as the Bidask data, it's a couple of different things, but yeah, one of them will be differentiating the level or the degree of churn. That'll be the most useful function of it. For the Bidask data. So some of the bars, right now the constraints are, I think, a little bit too tight for the churn bars. And if you loosen them up, then you're showing bars that aren't necessarily true churn. So true churn would be very high volume with a tight range, okay? At least as defined right now by the churn. But really, let me just kind of explain this briefly, and then we'll move on. So you have, in any given bar, you have a total number of transactions, contracts, and total price movement, meaning how many times did it actually tick up and tick down, right? So total ticks, which is transactions, total volume, contracts, and then total price movement, and then the range. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing, not only with the bid and ask data, to try to refine the churn conditions, is look also at the total price movement. So it's not that to get a churn bar, well, how should I say this? So the way that I have it constrained now, it's looking at just range for the churn. So it has to be very high volume. And then when you divide the volume by the range, it has to be very high volume per range, which is what we're calling the density. And then it also has to be a narrower range. Okay, and you can constrain that as tight as you want. You can make it to where it has to be the smallest range of the past 5 or 10 or 15 bars, however many number of bars you want to use. And then it also has to be the range has to be below a certain standard deviation. So there's a couple of different constraints that you could add to it and only find very specific churn bars. But one thing that we're not really accounting for yet is, what if it's actually an increased range, right? So the range is larger than the previous bar. But if you look inside of that bar at the total number of upticks and downticks, it's actually a huge amount of total price movement. So it's actually gone up and down and up and down and up and down multiple times within that bar. But you're not getting the signal that it's a churn bar when you definitely should be. So that's one of the things that I'll be adding into the churn bar as well. So the bid-ask data might make it to where I'm getting the same information as I would get from that total price movement. But I won't really know until I can get it programmed in there. I'm going to access the volume data from, let's say, the 5-minute on this little RTS chart here. So I've got a new beta for Bloodhound and Blackbird, which seems to be pretty good. Excuse me. I mean, there are quite a few bugs that still have to be worked out, but he's definitely a lot closer. On each tick. Yeah, so Bloodhound has to be set to, I think we might be able to get away with setting it to only calculate on each price change. As long as the reader would be set up the same exact way. Or sorry, as long as the indicator that we're reading is set up the same exact way. I won't get into all those details, but for right now, it has to be set up to calculate on each tick. All right, so I'm adding Bloodhound to this chart on the right, and I want to access the signals from this chart on the left. So I want to access that volume divergence right there. So I'll add this indicator threshold. And then add the volume analyst reader. One caveat, you have to actually load it first. Okay, and this is the reader manager now. So once we get it in there, to get it to connect, we'll have to click on this recalculate all button. Okay, this was the most difficult thing to do with this whole system. Basically what this is now, rather than being an indicator, it's an add-on. So Ninja has these different add-ons that we can build, which basically they all function as a separate window. And linking those to charts is kind of a difficult thing to do. But anyhow, well, we basically figured it out through a couple of different little tricks. But anyway, I'll show you this time frame calculator too before we go. All right, so I've got it loaded here, and now I'm just selecting the string, the chart. So I'll connect it to this 5-minute chart. And we want the volume divergence set up. Yeah. Okay. All right, so I get a 1 for a long and a -1 for a short, and then I recalculate. Let me just see here. There we go. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you have to reload it after you get it in there. So that's something where we'll have sorted out for the 24th. But for right now, just to get it to kind of connect properly for the historical bars, you have to reload the chart. But that will be replaced completely with just having to tap the recalculate button. Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, so now we actually have the ability to read in Ninja 8 all of these other charts, which is pretty cool. So I think now that we have the volume analyst reader in Ninja 8, the indicator reader will hopefully not be too far behind. That's actually quite a bit more difficult to do, to get it to, draw plots and draw multiple plots. So for those of you that actually have that indicator reader, that's quite a bit more sophisticated than just reading the signals from another chart. But this is the main functionality that had to be figured out first. Actually reading other charts from a single chart, which, it's not really, I don't think, supposed to be possible, but we now have it. So pretty cool stuff. Let me just copy that, add it again. This is volume divergence on the 5 minute. So now let's add a churn bar, which I think is a value of 4. Okay, let's see. Before I reload that, let me try one thing. I just want to see if this is going to work here. I'm going to reload that. Nah, I thought he had it to where I didn't have to reload the chart anymore, but anyway, that'll be the next major thing. So yeah, those are the churn bars from the 5 minute chart. And then, I can combine that with whatever. And by the time we get to the point where we're releasing the market geometry analysis service, I think we'll probably have, I know we'll have a beta version, or let's say an alpha version of the toolbar for Ninja 8. But now that he's got the reader system done, I'm hoping that, all the readers for the market geometry stuff will be a lot easier to do. I mean, he has the main algorithm stuff done. It's just a matter of making it work properly on Ninja 8, which he's a heck of a lot more familiar with now. So it should all start coming together here pretty soon. Let me grab you guys a link to this Ninja Manager real quick. And then I'll show you this time frame calculator, and then we'll call it a day. I know this was pretty kind of extemporaneous and not very prepared. I wasn't very prepared, but at least you guys got a chance to see what all we're working on here. As chaotic of a demonstration as it may have been. Div Pro will be the next thing. So we have quite a bit of the actual divergence algorithm already done for it. the main issue will be the drawing and getting it to work with any other indicator. So that we really have no idea how long that'll take. It may be so difficult that we just kind of program in a couple of oscillators directly into it, because you know what the deal is with that, right? So when you try to load another indicator into DivPro, you've got this pop-out window, right? And that's what enables you to put it on any other oscillator or instrument. So this is that system. And this is what took so long in Ninja 7 to do. And getting that to work in Ninja 8 is going to be a nightmare, I'm sure. So we may just have to release a simpler version that just works with, I don't know, like the balance momentum, RSI, MACD, you know, build in a couple of basic indicators into it, and then eventually release the version that can handle any oscillator, any indicator, any data series. So that's the really big chunk of programming that's incredibly difficult. Yeah, it's built into the installer for Ninja 8 Weldon. So when you run that installer, that Ninja 8 installer, it'll have the RTS Hybrid in there. So the problem with that, we couldn't separately license the RTS Hybrid for Ninja 8, so we kind of had to put it with another DLL. So when you license the Volume Analyst 8, it also licenses the RTS Hybrid. So for the 24th, we'll have a new version of that, which I'm thinking will be a little bit more refined and have some sort of pop-out license mechanism thing. Clarify BH templates for Ninja 7. Yeah, they will. The ones from the previous, yeah. No, we haven't done that yet, William. So we didn't cover it. We don't have it. We're still doing a lot of other stuff, a lot of bugs and the multiple time frame stuff. We're not even to the point to where we can start on it yet. Okay. Yeah, so this time frame, the thing with the RTS hybrid charts, what I'm trying to do is essentially emulate a a time period, like say a 3-minute chart. Let me do this. So let's say this RTS2 is an attempt at trying to get the equivalent of about a 3-minute chart on more like a 2-minute chart, really, on a non-time based chart. So let's say what I do here really is start with the tick chart. Let me just show you my method here. All right, so this is the method I have for this. What I'm doing is, and this is obviously all done through an add-on now programmatically, but what I'm doing is identifying the total number of ticks in the RTH session of each instrument over the past 10 days or 10 sessions or so. And then I'm finding the average, obviously, of those 10 sessions, average number of ticks per session. And then I'm trying to find what the average number of ticks would be for a 3-minute bar. Okay. And then I'm setting that as my lower time frame tick chart. So when I did this, 3 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, for a 3-minute chart, the tick value that would be, about the equivalent of a 3-minute bar was 3,770 ticks for the ES. Okay, so let's figure out what it is right now. So to do that, I have this little add-on, which will have a lot of other options. It'll work with volume. It'll display, total transactions for the look-back period, average transactions per session, and then it'll show you the average amount of transactions per your target time period, as well as volume per tick. I think we'll probably have like total range, average range per session, and it's probably about it. Maybe one or two other options in there. So what you do is you figure out which list your instrument is on, which were futures. So we're looking at futures, ES, and I want to use the RTH session. So that's the CME US Index Futures RTH. And I want to look back 10 sessions. And my target minute period is 3, and then I click calculate. If I'm connected to data, which I am not, but I think it should already have enough data in there. And it takes a minute because it's having to filter through. It's corrupted. Okay, let me connect to data. It's usually pretty quick. And then we'll download it again. So I'm using this to determine the tick chart size. And then from there, I set the tick values for the RTS bars. Okay. So that's how we're doing that. Rather than before, we just had kind of a willy-nilly, this is the value of the tick chart for this instrument. This is the value of the tick chart for that instrument, without any real logical method to it. I was basically just kind of eyeballing it and trying to get it to look similar to about a 5-minute or 3-minute chart. Whereas now we actually have a proper method and a little tool to make sure it's right. 1 second here. It's saying I have to restart. That's one good thing about Ninja 8, though. It starts up in about 10 seconds or less. Okay, now it's starting. I'll go ahead and connect. All right, I'll let it finish downloading the data for these charts, and then we'll run this thing one time so you can just see how it works. It's pretty cool here. Let's see. $10 and $3 and calculate. I may have corrupted the data in the cache. And yeah, it does take a little bit of time to download, sort, and put that together. Yeah, so now it's 33, right. So when I did that, we had just come out of that huge down move, and then right back up and right back down. So it was quite a bit larger before. What was it, 3770? Yeah. So now I'm thinking we'll probably do this once a week. Maybe that's too much. Maybe we'll just do it once every 2 weeks. But right now it's 3665. So, or sorry, 3365. So I'll use that for the lower time frame tick chart, and then from there I use a multiple of 6 times that for the higher time frame tick chart, and then divide it by 2 for the tick value of the RTS2, and then divide that by 3 for the RTS1 tick value. And I have a document for this as well, which I'll send out. I have this in a Google Doc. So you guys, can fully understand exactly how I'm building these tick charts and RTS charts and all that. Why am I using the RTH session and not the full day? Because of the transactions, because of the total number of transactions. I'm trying to emulate a 3-minute chart during the day session. So that 3-minute chart during the overnight is, it only contains maybe a 20th the total number of ticks in the overnight. So it just doesn't compare. It doesn't give me the data that I'm looking for. I want there to be about an even number of bars between the open and the close on the tick chart as there are on a 3-minute chart for that same period. So the difference in ticks from the overnight to the day session is just way too dramatic, for something like the ES or NQ or something like that. Yeah, so for each market has an RTH session, except for, I guess you could argue about that for the FOREX, but the FOREX also has an RTH session. And there are differences between the overnight, I think mostly because it's the majority of the people that trade the FOREX futures are American during business hours, during the United States. So I think that's probably what accounts for the difference in the number of ticks in the overnight and the day session. So each market, even the FOREX markets, the FOREX futures, has an RTH session. And each one of them I've listed out here for you. So the one for crude is the NYMEX Energy RTH, which is 9 to 2:30 Eastern. The only one that doesn't is the FDAX, because the FDAX is open 14 hours straight, and then it's closed. So yeah, FDAX is about the only one that doesn't have a proper RTH session. Gold has one. It's a weird one. I don't know if I put gold in here or not. Yeah. NYMEX Metals RTH2 is the name of the session template. And that's from 8:20 Eastern to 1:30. So I think it's the shortest RTH session we have, gold and silver. Yeah. I'll, in the final version of this, I'll probably have it to where it automatically, at least for the main futures markets, I'll see if I can't make it to where it will automatically populate the RTH session, and then you can just change it to ETH if you want to. RTH regular trading hours, ETH extended trading hours, or electronic trading hours. The volume is gone. I might have been talking low, or the microphone may have been too far from my mouth. Yeah, this calculator is something that I created, yeah. Josh wrote it for me. Let's see. That'll be available by the 24th as well. And it's, it's not like any sort of indicator, so it's not exactly going to be very expensive. I'm not sure exactly how we're going to do it, but we'll give all of you guys whatever we're thinking of charging for it. We'll give you guys a chance to get it for half of that. I mean, I don't think it's going to be more than $80. So you guys maybe 40. Yeah, I don't have a chart identifier that we've made, but there is one. Let me see if I can find the actual. I must have already deleted it. Yeah, this is it right here. So if you know how to import this or compile, let me see if I can. Okay. Here's the CS file anyway. I don't know if that helps you, but you can get it from Big Mike's too. There's an NT8 version on futures.io. Yeah, Bill, you probably did. Is it the one from Big Mike's? Okay, cool. There's one for NT8 on there now. Maybe just recently. Excuse me. Josh actually got that one for me from Big Mike's like a month ago. Not even a couple of weeks ago. All right, you guys have any questions about any of this? I'm sure you do, but I guess they'll all be answered here on the 24th. Most of them anyway. But yeah, if you have any right now, go ahead and pass them to me while I wrap this up here. So I'm thinking when we do all this market geometry analysis sort of stuff, I'm not sure exactly how that's going to work for people that aren't in the trading room, that just own the toolbar, how they can, still get access, but not being in the trading room. I'm thinking about doing some sort of forum on the website. I can actually host Slack on the website in the members area. Not sure. Guess we'll see how it goes. But eventually, when I get that members area done the way that I want it, it'll be more of a kind of a forum-based community kind of a thing, rather than, you know, only those of you that are in the trading room that can kind of keep in touch with each other and communicate via Slack. We'll have some of that built in directly to the website, and then you guys can have your own, you know, groups or whatever on there, and all sort of work together. Because I know learning this stuff has been pretty difficult for many of you. But once this new members area is done and this stuff is released for Ninja 8, starting, well, probably starting the end of next week, I'll be working solely on, well, let's say 50-50 on building courses and finishing this update for Ninja 8. And then once that's done, I'll be working solely on course material. So that'll be the next big thing that we'll do. And then it'll hopefully all be on a forum. Yeah, Ninja 8, now it's looking like probably definitely by the end of July. It may not be completely done, but we'll absolutely have working beta versions of everything by then. I don't know that we'll have every single detail of everything that we can do with a toolbar in Ninja 7, but we'll definitely have quite a bit done for sure. So you mean changes to the toolbar? Yeah, I mean, ultimately the methods are what they are, right? It's market geometry and then confirming the areas. So it's mostly about just making the tools better and getting to the point to where we could have this import-export system done. So after all of this, there's really not much else that's going to be changing. The only thing that'll be, well, basically the biggest changes will be adding in that extra data for the volume, the Bidask data in Ninja 8. But other than that, I mean, the methodology is the same. The tools will just get more refined over time. But yeah, the toolbar has been getting probably way too many features, really. That thing is a beast. It's definitely pretty amazing. Anyway, all right. I'll talk to you guys in the room on Monday. And then the following Monday, probably, I'll send out a registration for that final webinar we'll do on the 24th with shark indicators. And then we'll have a proper training session with everything, you know, clearly defined and mapped out and good to go for that Saturday. Going over the volume analyst for Ninja 8. And that'll be the main thing that we'll focus on. So that webinar will be mostly just strictly about the volume analyst inside of Bloodhound. And then I might show briefly just a glimpse of the new toolbar. And that'll be it. All right, you guys. Y'all have a good one. I've probably missed some. They're kind of flying in now. If I missed anything, just write in to support, and I'll check it here in about an hour. All right, you guys. Talk to those of you in the trading room on Monday, and then the rest of you will probably have a beta release for the volume analysts. I was going to say maybe Wednesday of next week, between Wednesday and Friday. So we'll do a little session then. And I'll send you the details about all that on Monday or Tuesday, depending on how far we've made it by then. All right. Yeah, and one more thing. The next beta, the beta 2 for the toolbar, will be Tuesday or Wednesday. We still just have to test a few things with this new import method. So that'll be coming to you guys in the trading room probably Tuesday. All right. Everybody have a good weekend.